Hi everyone, I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does a deep dive into the big stories of the day. Just when you think that there could not have been more drama associated with the farmers' protests, came this dramatic twist. International pop sensation Rihanna decided to speak up, literally providing an umbrella as cover for India's protesting farmers, umbrella being, of course, one of her biggest chartbusters. This as barricades continue to come up at least 3 protest sites at the borders of the capital, not just cement walls, but also concertina wires, as you can see on your screen, iron rods, nails, spikes. The police says this is precautionary to prevent a repeat of Republic Day. But whether or not you like what Rihanna has to say, whether or not you think she knows anything at all about where Punjab is, Haryana is, Uttar Pradesh is, or what the farm laws are about, she clearly got under the skin of the government. The government that has been pretty much mum for a while on this, other than the Prime Minister reiterating the official position at an all-party meeting, came up with a very, very sharp response. If you look at the statement that's come out of the Foreign Ministry, it was quite literally fuming. It blamed what it called vested interests for foisting an agenda and said it was unfortunate to see vested interests force what the government called a propaganda. It also made a reference to the desecration of Mahatma Gandhi statues that have taken place in the United States of America, seeking to draw a link between the kind of commentary that we've seen from Rihanna and other Hollywood celebrities, and of course took a moment to praise the police for showing the restraint that it has. So this in itself a contradiction in terms. A lot of people saying, hey Rihanna, mind your own business, but why did the government then choose to respond today? The government went on to say that the protests must be seen in the context of India's democratic ethos and polity. This is the MEA statement. The MEA shouldn't have been responding to pop stars. It didn't name Rihanna in that statement, but clearly coming the morning after that tweet by Rihanna and other Hollywood celebrities, then creating a kind of international chorus warning against sensationalist hashtags that are neither responsible nor accurate. So does Rihanna's tweet matter? Should we be concerned with how the world is looking at this? Whether or not you think she knows anything about the farm protests, the fact of the matter is that the Western media gaze is now back on the story, and thus so is the Western media. Let's introduce our very distinguished panel today. We've got a full house, but we promise to give everybody a chance to speak. We're welcoming to the program our Jagannathan, who's, of course, a senior veteran journalist and editor with Swarajya magazine. We're also welcoming to the program Hannah Ellis-Peterson, who's with The Guardian, based out of India. Welcome. Welcome also to the program Mekhala Krishnamurthy, who's done a lot of work as an anthropologist and a social scientist on the agriculture sector. Welcome, Mekhala. Ambassador Singh, not known to pull his punches ever in his criticism of this government, but also speaking today as a veteran diplomat. Govindraj Ethiraj, one of our best-known business journalists, also leads Boom Live among many other ventures. Anuraag Saxena, a columnist, commentator based out of Singapore, and Kaveree Bamzai, one of our best-known journalists as well. So really, we do try on this program and on this platform to not be ideologically wedded to one or the other point of view, to have a full variety, to have a full house, and that's what we're trying to do here today. And let me start with Ambassador Singh. I come to you as the diplomat on this show. The foreign ministry seemingly responding to Rihanna, though she was not named in the statement. Did that surprise you?
Barkha, let me in full disclosure say that I am actually the great-grandson of a farmer. You go into any Jat-Sikh's background and you'll bump into a farmer. So to that extent, I empathize with the farmers. I retained my farmland till well into 1990s. And so one has more than just academic interest in the subject, and finds it very funny when people who have nothing to do with farming hold forth sitting in Mumbai or wherever and say this, that, and the rest, and take a purely very limited economist view of the subject. Now, what did Rihanna say? Rihanna essentially was reacting to a CNN story. And she said, hey, let's pay attention to this too. So therefore, it was really a public relations thing, because I don't think we have come out, or External Affairs Ministry, you know, I've been spokesman of the ministry, but spokesman of the ministry should have addressed CNN, not really Rihanna. And there was no need to have gone overboard and become so defensive about it. The statement itself, MEA statement, has facts and some things which are not facts. It's a mixture of the two. It should have been a very simple statement saying CNN hasn't got the story right, or you address CNN. But to unleash someone we know who is intemperate with her words and then calling for all farmers as terrorists, I mean, this is despicable. If BJP really supports that, because that argument BJP tried making and it's fallen apart since the Cats have taken over the leadership. There's a big
Right.
Mahapanchayat on as we speak in Jind, which is in the heartland of Haryana.
Yeah, we
So
have
now
those
this
pictures, and
agitation
we'll
is
play those
no
pictures of
longer
Jeeves
having
also.
a Sikh
But
face.
Casey,
And in
but
any case,
Casey,
how do you
yeah,
equate
sorry.
all Sikhs with terrorists? I mean, it's ridiculous.
No, no, of course, you're mixing up lots of
I said,
different
how do you
issues,
equate
and
all
we'll.
Sikhs with terrorists? It's
I,
ridiculous
got-
to
I,
me.
I got that. I got
Yeah.
that. But I just want to say, do you believe as a diplomat, someone who's sort of served on behalf of the Indian state, do you think we should care? After the sort of the chuckles and the mocking and the fun on Twitter, do you think, and we just lost Casey there as I was asking exactly that question, do you think we should care at all? And Casey believes that the foreign ministry statement was actually disproportionate and it needn't have reacted that. And let me take that to our Jagannathan. Jaggi, do you believe that the government can't have it both ways? You can't on the one hand say, hey, why the hell do we care what some foreigner is saying, even if she happens to be someone with 100 million followers, and then go and issue this long, elaborate, aggressive defensive statement.
I agree, but I think we all Indians tend to have that problem. We do have a thin skin, and we just can't let it be and say we actually ignored it. It would have probably died on its own. But since we get angry over what we think is something unfair, we tend to combat it and then make things worse. So that's what's happened in this case. In fact, if you note, actually, I was reluctant to join this show because I don't think Rihanna really matters. But in any case, I said, fine, if you want to discuss the issues around it and what media is up to or what people are up to,
yeah, of course.
fine, I'm okay with it.
It's a context to discuss it. It's a context to discuss
the point is, just like Casey said, that I understand what farming is. And he might be able to say something about useful about it, but it's not a whole world saying something about what's happening in India is something ridiculous, but I'd rather not respond to it. Fine, maybe Rihanna is releasing some album later this year after 1 year of doing nothing during the COVID time. So probably she needs all the attention she wants and she's getting it.
Okay, so we will come, of course, to how the government has responded, because that is important, right? The government's management of narrative, the government's management of perception, and what has not helped, Jaggi, and I want your comment on that, and that will get the world's attention. And let's bring up those pictures. When you see barricades, when you see iron rods, when you see spikes, you see nails, right? I spent the morning at the Singh border, and some of these images are really, really disturbing. And you can see there spikes at the road. They're obviously the police say to prevent what happened on Republic Day from repeating itself. But even former police commissioners like Amod Kant have said on this program that these images are disturbing and Delhi can never be Tiananmen Square. Now, it may seem like a hyperbolic statement, but these are not the images, Jaggi, you'd agree, that are designed to instill confidence for a world that is looking closely at the story. Maybe you can dismiss Rihanna as someone who knows nothing about anything, but you can't dismiss the response of the global community at large, can you?
No, I don't. I think the optics of these things certainly are not nice, and this is not the way one should be presented to the world. Though I think the police are reacting. I think we need to understand where the police are coming from. The police operate in an analogic world where they are dealing with crowds on the street, whereas the activists are operating the digital landscape, the cyberspace, where mobilization is very easy because of technology. And I think they do not know how to deal with it. We do not have a first world police force, and therefore their reactions to how to prevent what happened on 26 January are very analog. So I think we need to understand them till we modernize our police forces, until they are able to deal with real-time situations in a real-time way. I think these kind of things will happen because the farmers have laid siege to Delhi and the police have actually accentuated the siege by putting spikes on the ground. So we are actually making things worse. So I do agree with that, but I think we need to understand where the police are coming from.
Sure. I'd actually be the first to say that the police, I think, are in a damned if they do and a damned if they don't situation. And it is a terrible situation for the police. Casey is back with us. Casey, I'm going to let you complete your point and then we'll open it up for the panel. Please go ahead.
Yeah, you see, essentially, India is a democracy. We market ourselves as a democracy. What is Quad? We position ourselves with the three other democracies in the Asia Pacific to counter China. So if the narrative, the reason India is attractive for other countries, the reason US and the other countries want to help us, have been trying to help us for many decades, right from 1962, is because India was seen as a democratic country, as a country with rule of law, with freedoms. So when others comment on those things, we shouldn't get so agitated about it. They feel India is falling below, in their mind, a certain level that India has set for itself, which our constitution has set, which our past has set. And therefore, if we fall below it, and then we criticize the rest of the world and say, you have no business to point fingers, then are you a Myanmar or a China? You have to make a distinction between them. And therefore, the media management has to be done accordingly. You don't go overboard. You can point out deficiencies in a story, but you don't go so much overboard that you unleash your Twitter army, and you have intemperate people say all kinds of things to your own population and to the foreigners. Now, that is no way to handle media or media narrative or international narrative.
Yeah. So I could see Jaggi disagreeing, and just a brief interjection for him from him, and then we do have to get to the issues around this narrative contestation. Jaggi, go ahead.
I disagree with Casey that the USA somehow wants the Quad because it's about democracies. Okay, if they had a Saudi Arabia that was important for the same, fight back against Chinese aggression, they would use them. So it's not to do with anything to do with our democracy or lack of it, whatever. And the USA didn't exactly provide a great example of democracy recently. So I think let's keep the excess talk of democracy aside. Yes, we need to be democracies is different. That's for our own good. The Quad is not because it's about democracy.
Okay, let's just open this up. There are multiple issues here. You can ignore Rihanna. You can pretend that she didn't tweet. You can pretend that it doesn't matter, or you can actually believe that it doesn't matter, because substantively, I think after one day's headlines, the only difference it's actually going to make is that the global media might refocus on the story. That is what I think will be the actual consequence of this. And so let me bring in Hannah from The Guardian. Hannah, we saw some foreign correspondents actually sort of do an all-embracing endorsement of what Rihanna has said. I think Lauren Frey of NPR said, this is the Twitter interaction she's here for. It obviously had its share of a headline-grabbing moment. But in terms of, the world looking in at India, the world looking in at these farmer protests in the year of a pandemic, when countries like the United Kingdom, the USA are actually obsessed and preoccupied with COVID, does this actually put the story back on the global map? And has that been the real consequence, not whether Rihanna knows where Punjab is or what the farmers' agitation is about?
I mean, I think you've got to, from my perspective, Rihanna tweeting about this, you kind of take it with a pinch of salt. The significance is that the government chose to respond. Celebrities kind of wading into political issues. It happens a lot. They try and kind of give themselves some currency in doing that. She's also tweeted about Myanmar out of nowhere. These things there's not very much consequence to them. The only consequence is then if you have this kind of lengthy MEA statement, which takes it up, which is then becomes sort of interesting issue. It exposes how defensive the government has been about this, how concerned they are about their international reputation around this. And this sort of, so it just exposes the government much more than it does kind of having anything really to do with Rihanna. So, when I saw she tweeted about this, I thought it was quite funny, kind of an amusing celebrity intervention. And also, this is a story I'm working on. And so it's kind of, which I think hasn't necessarily got the international coverage that I think it sometimes deserves. So from a journalistic point of view, Rihanna kind of drawing attention to it serves my purposes as a South Asia correspondent, but I think it's significant.
You mean Hannah, you find a way to tell your editors that hey, let me here in Delhi get space for that story, so it suits you.
Did. That was the conversation I had this morning with my editor. I'm doing another story today because the top line is, the Indian government responds to a tweet by Rihanna. I mean, it is quite ridiculous in that sense, and I think quite unnecessary of them, to be honest. Celebrities do often do this, and I think it didn't necessarily reflect poorly on India. I think it was just a sort of, Rihanna had read CNN that day. She also tweeted about Myanmar. I just don't think it really warranted the kind of statement that it did. And it has, therefore, from my personal experience, churned up a lot of international interest around it. So
you're basically saying if the government had just ignored it, if the government had just ignored this tweet, this story would have gone away quicker, right? From a media point of view or a global media point of view.
Well, I mean, it also fed into a sort of broader narrative, which is, we're also seeing these images from the border of the spikes, of the barriers, of the, it kind of played in. So it was a sort of, you've got this very kind of visual idea of the government cracking down. You've got, also follows on the arrests of journalists and people tweeting about this story. And so and then the government responding to a tweet by Rihanna was almost just the kind of, I guess, just the sort of pinnacle of this, really. It just kind of fuels a story that has kind of been gathering a lot of momentum, particularly in international media. The farmers' protests, sort of got a lot of interest to begin with, and it kind of died down. The Republic Day protests obviously created sort of big resurgence in interest. But yeah, then the kind of increasing government response to it since then is the thing that's kept the story alive in the international media. And their response to Rihanna's tweet is going to be the basis of my story today. So that's kind of...
and I think that's the point. I think both Casey and Jaggi are kind of agreeing that there's been an overreaction, from the government. Kaveree, if you want to step in with your media perspective, and then Govind and Anuraag, I want to focus with Mekhala on some of the issues that we're dealing with, and that's what I promised her. So Kaveree, go ahead.
Yeah, just a minor point I'd like to make. I'd like to focus on the whole sort of face-off between Kangana and Rihanna, if you want to call it that. And I think Madeleine Albright said it really well. There's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. And I think this kind of face-off that you had, with Kangana calling out Rihanna, calling her a porn star, putting up pictures of her which are provocative, and calling herself a Sanghi role model, and calling her a liberal role model. I mean, this is ridiculous, but this is exactly the kind of mindset that, I'm afraid right-wing feminists have. And it has always disturbed me, because I have always maintained that right-wing political parties are quite misogynistic. And I'm always told that, no, but look at so many powerful women in especially the BJP. And I always feel that if it's not progressive feminism, and if it doesn't intersect with a sense of feeling the empathy of other oppressed classes, which is what intersectional feminism is all about, then how can you have anything like a right-wing feminist? So this whole idea of Kangana calling out the army the troll army, obviously, not the actual army, although she's capable of that, calling out the troll army and sort of asking them to attack her, come on India, show your power, and of course misspelling propaganda along the way. I think it's very distressing, and I think it really feeds into this whole narrative of this very regressive kind of feminism which is now held aloft to us.
But you know what, when I'm listening to you, Kaveree, I'm thinking that all of us on this program actually, I have to say I wrote a Washington Post piece, and very greedily I put Rihanna in the headline because I knew it would be an algorithm, like a searchable word. But if you personally ask me my opinion, I think it's absolutely superficial for Rihanna to be tweeting about the farmer protest. I think it's absolutely superficial. But I'm already seeing us having substantive discussions on the government's response, on the feminism debate that is provoked. So it's actually had a consequence. It's actually part already of our national and international conversation, whether or not we think it was superficial and kind of airheady of her.
But, Barkha, just one point I want to make about Rihanna, you also have to look at her not just as a female pop icon. Also, remember, she's perhaps the world's wealthiest female musician. She's also not just anyone from Barbados. She has like almost a national level status in Barbados. She's the ambassador for youth and culture there. So she's not just a non-entity. In Barbados, where she comes...
I call her a non-entity. I'm just saying she waded into a subject that she read a CNN article. She retweeted it casually, as we all often retweet it. She did some sort of broad-based commentary. We may agree with that commentary, but it didn't necessarily come from a place of research, which is
That's
fine.
all right, but I think celebrity endorsements and celebrities weighing in on issues, whether in India or internationally, usually they don't have a complete knowledge.
Of course, by contrast, we had Akshay Kumar here doing the exact opposite. I think we've got his tweet somewhere. So, all right. So this is what's happening, right? It's become like, there it is, Akshay Kumar stepping in there, endorsing the foreign ministry statement. So this has become like a bit of a, like you want this story to go away, but you're making it a bigger and bigger story. Akshay Kumar is close to the government, sharing the MEA statement. Can we have longer sort of stays on those slides so we can actually read them properly? Let me just bring in Govind now. Govind, this conversation has ceased to be about the farm laws, and that's the pity. We can't actually, every conversation around this conversation is now about everything but the legislation itself. It's gone well beyond that moment. And partly it's the government's handling, some would say mishandling, partly it's the sort of what happened at Republic Day, partly it's the farmers' capacity to stay on, which has been repeatedly underestimated by the government. Now Rihanna wades into it. This story isn't going away.
It isn't going away, but and actually I'm a little more saddened in a way, because this comes on the heels of the union budget, which was presented just 2 days ago, which was in my mind, given all the circumstances, given the fact that we are in the shadow of COVID-19, a good budget in terms of what it aimed to do and what it could achieve, given the circumstances, in the general capability of government to do what it can do. So that was an economic effort to solve some of the problems, perhaps even partially linked to what we are seeing right now in Punjab. Now, the Punjab problem, just to come back to the first principle, so to speak, in this case, is that there are farmers who are protesting the 3 farm laws. That's to do essentially with the Agriculture Produce Marketing Committee, the intermediary that buys produce from them, and the minimum support price at which it buys. So what they're worried about, at least ostensibly, is that they will not be able to get the right price or the fair price for their produce, and they'll be robbed of that. The other thing is that there is a fear that big companies or large companies will come and take over their land or enter into unfavorable contracts that's unfavorable for them, and therefore deny them the right to right to livelihood and so on. So I think the government still has the task of convincing them, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I mean, fair disclosure, I support the entry of business into agriculture. I'm not sure whether these 3 farm laws are the best drafted to do that, and I'm sure it can be improved and will be. But I do support the entry of business into agriculture for all the right reasons. Also remember that agriculture, almost 600 million people plus, as per the last census, are in agriculture, but they only contribute about 14% or less of GDP. If I'm wrong in these figures, anyone is free to correct me. So the fact is that this is a highly unproductive large workforce, and we need to address that problem. And that problem cannot be addressed by getting into Twitter wars and wasting what I can see an entire day. I mean, when you have such synchronized responses on social media, Bollywood, all of that, this is management time. Someone, and actually a lot of people, are getting together, making phone calls, writing drafts, sharing them, getting it checked, putting it out, and then coordinating the Bollywood response and so on. I mean, all of this takes time. This cannot happen by a bunch of interns sitting around either in MEA or finance ministry or whichever ministry that is involved in this. So I think to me it's a waste of management time. It doesn't matter whether it's Rihanna or, more likely, Meena Harris, the niece of Kamala Harris, who tweeted. I think is the one who's there targeting perhaps a little more than the pop star, but it doesn't really matter. I think we should get back to what the original problem was. Sit down with the farmers, reach out to them, convince them that here is what we want to do. Here are your problems. Here is how we want to address them. And eventually, I think let's make sure that we have a proper solution for agriculture, which is what we need at a larger level.
And I agree with you, and I just want to get Anuraag, and then Mekhala can also walk us through some of the associated issues. The energy that has been spent on getting these coordinated responses from Bollywood, the energy that has been spent on this long government statement, if one fraction of this energy was diverted to actually engaging with the farmers, would it not have been better served? Because you can't say on the one hand that Rihanna or Greta Thunberg is a trivialization of the issue and then pull up your Bollywood stars to counter them, because then you're just doing trivialization versus trivialization, right, Anuraag?
Well, there's a couple of things here, Barkha. I mean, let's swap the direction of these inputs around. I know we're debating Rihanna and Mia Khalifa and Lily Singh and whoever else have weighed in. Now, imagine if Rakhi Sawant had weighed in on US politics. I'm very sure that
Rakhi Sawant is not Rihanna. Firstly, it's not a fair analogy. Rakhi Sawant is not just success, measuring strictly by success. recognition, international recognition, the kind of following, the achievement, the accomplishments. I mean, just for that reason. If you said Rihanna and Lata Mangeshkar, sure. Rakhi Sawant, no.
Be that as it may, that's your view. I mean, the point I'm making here is both of these are self-made artists. Both of them are strong women. Both of them have a fan following which is of their own. And both of them might be ignorant of issues that they seem to be poking their nose into. There is no threshold beyond which a celebrity attains status to become a public policy expert or a geopolitical expert. The larger point I'm making here is that the whole Western savior complex is something that has been overbearing for a while, commenting on issues around the world. And I think that's something that the government has responded to, not just an individual issue, although I agree with Casey and Jaggi that the timing is terrible. I mean, for an example, you have Blackpink out there with 56 million followers, the fastest growing pop band in the world, K-pop band, what have you. But if Blackpink were to weigh in on quantitative easing, I'm very sure that none of us would be interested in their opinion. I mean, Blackpink weighing in on quantitative easing is as relevant as you or me weighing in on the Coachella. It really doesn't matter. So I think
we've made it matter, right? Look at, and that's the point Hannah's made, right? Look at how we've made it matter. We've discussed feminism, Bollywood, whether Bollywood speaks, Hollywood, Western savior complex, the Quad, China, it's all there, and it's all started by one Rihanna tweet, right, Anurag?
You know what? So I'll go back to what you had said at the beginning, Barkha. This whole topic, controversy, whatever you call it, needs to just be dealt with the chuckles that it deserves. I'm using your word here. That's all there is. I mean, they are entertainers, they are entertaining, and that's where it should begin and that's where it should end. Otherwise, they're irrelevant. I mean, you might have Kaveree, who's a major fan of Rihanna and might look at it as a women fan, women empowerment symbol and what have you. But they're not experts in what they are speaking about. They might make a few waves within geographical domains or within demographics which are largely irrelevant to us as a nation. And we need to stop being smitten by people outside. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I live outside India. I'm very proudly.
I don't want to pick up this idea of the Western savior complex, but I just want to come to Mekhala. She's been waiting very patiently, and then we can go around the panel again. Mekhala, you spent a lot of time actually working on this issue. How do you get yourself heard in the noise of the politics, the sensationalism, the violence, the dramatic visual imagery of those barricades? It is impossible actually to have a reasonable conversation about these farm laws anymore. It is impossible to have a dispassionate conversation about them anymore. They've become about everything else. They've become about whether you like Modi or you hate Modi. They've become about capitalism versus socialism. They've become about dissent versus, the place of dissent in democracy. They've become about Sikh identity, Jat identity, and now they've become about Rihanna.
It's hard not to channel the frustration that you're expressing about us not being able to talk about the real issues and what's at stake. But I would like to also, maybe look back and think about why have protests on agriculture and by farmers attracted this kind of attention. It's not about Rihanna, but even within India. And I think here, instead of thinking about how tragic it is, it's important for us to see this as an opportunity for us to all recognize the place that agriculture has in India today. It is the largest sector of livelihood. It is an essential part of the economy, because we have to remember that although it is 15 to 17% of GDP, it is what connects, food, fodder, fiber, fuel, these are all connected to agriculture, and it brings together producers and consumers. So although on the one hand we can say that we're not able to have a conversation about it, I think we need to also understand that nothing like agriculture can bring about this kind of interest and this kind of focus. It is not like any other sector in the economy. It is vital to our food security. It is vital to our livelihood. And I think that's also what we're seeing. So in some ways, you're also seeing the power of agriculture, right? The power of farmers, of how—
And the moral force that they're able to assert, despite what happened on Republic Day, when that moral force seemed obviously eroded, they have been able to come back from it.
Yes. And, I think so here, I do think if we do anything to study history, right, we keep in mind that agriculture has always been at the heart of moral economy, right? Of what we think of is legitimate and illegitimate in a society that is caught together by so many contested interests. And agriculture is that sector, right? So I think one thing that we must reflect on is that agriculture and agricultural markets are political, right? They are deeply political, they are social, they are cultural, they're absolutely vitally economic, right? And I think what the farm laws and this entire debate has brought out so powerfully, and we should see that not only as a source of tension and conflict and frustration, but also as an opportunity to understand that if you want to resolve this problem, you have to commit to a process that really takes the sector seriously with all of its interests, all its contested interests and all its shared interests. And I think unless we do that, so I would like to see this, then, you ask, it's frustrating, but I do see it every opportunity as a conversation that we can start and restart to commit to agriculture and to it as a political process.
Before I take that back to Jaggi and Casey, the interesting point that you're making is that when people say, "Arey, ab to ye political ho gaya," now that it's become political, you're saying at its heart, it is the most political issue in the country, which is why even this government, not known for backstepping from almost anything, is not able to handle this in the way that it, for example, handled the scrapping of 370 in Kashmir. This government can't do it. It can't do it. They want to, but it can't do it. Jackie, let me take that to you, right? You said Rihanna's a non-issue, but many issues have come affiliated to that, and it all comes back to how should the government respond? Rihanna or no Rihanna, you're still left with the question, how should the government respond? At this point, what would you have the government do? And I would ask Ambassador Casey Singh the same question after that. Jaggi.
See, I think the government has gone as far as it can without humiliating itself. They have said we will keep the laws aside for 18 months. We'll discuss what is the way forward and then decide whether the laws actually need to be scrapped or merely amended. Okay. Now, if the farmers have taken a maximalist position, then I think there is nothing you can do. What I would suggest is, if I were the government, I would say you try and understand farmers. Contrary to what Mekhala said, I don't think we all have an atavistic love for farmers, because farming was the first phase of massive civilization and culture. So in that sense, we have a connection. But what is really happening in India is that farming is becoming less and less and less important for India. And in fact, the fact that 15% of GDP is supporting 45% of people is what is the problem. More than that, power is shifting away from the farm consistently. We are now an urban country. We are 55% urban. We are less than 50% agriculture. This is what the farmers are sensing. It is not about the farm laws. They see that increasingly in future, agriculture and farming will become even less of a power. So far, people have quoted farmers saying, oh, they are 70% of the country, we need to quote them. But they now realize they are only 45%. What they are seeing is that their power is going to go away forever, which is why they are so adamant on saying repeal the laws. They want to show that we can apna mardangi dikhayenge. This is what is the thing about. It's not really about the laws, because all farmers organizations that I have known for the last 20 years have wanted something of these kind of laws. Now when they have come, farmers are saying we don't want them. Okay, fine. My point is, this is about the waning power of agriculture, not about anything more. We all feel empathy for farmers saying they're Annadata, but I'm sorry, they are no longer our Annadatas. There is world, with just 4 or 5 states actually can produce more than enough food for the whole country. And agriculture has moved away from the core areas like Punjab and Haryana. The high productive areas, high productive, just one second. The high productive areas are all in the Ram Belt, that is UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and West Bengal also. These are the new hubs of rice cultivation. They are leaving Punjab behind.
You're actually suggesting that there's a loss of influence that is driving, in some ways, what you say are Punjab-centric agitations. I think many people would add now that the momentum and the fulcrum, the pivot, it's actually pivoted to Western UP in many ways. Mekhala, very brief interjection, and then Ambassador Casey Singh. Mekhala, go ahead.
I want to point out All of these years that I have engaged, the last 12 years working across multiple states, I have not met anybody who's only a farmer, right? Farmers have always been diversified. The fact that they do other things is not something that makes them less attached to land. We saw this with the migrant crisis as well. People hold on to land as a sense of assurance, insurance, and for food security. A very large number of people in India today, we saw this in Bihar and Odisha, actually don't sell in the market. They still consume the food that they produce on their land. These are complex transitions. You're absolutely right to point to the complexity of these transitions that are happening all across the country, across different agroecological and political economic regimes. I would like to point out that up until this point, it was well understood that there was so much diversity in agriculture. And this is the first time in Indian history that we have a central law on the single most important transaction, the first transaction between farmers and producers. This is unprecedented. We have never had a central law of this kind. And
well, that's been part of the resistance, right? Like if the government were actually, in my opinion, if the government was smarter about this, the government could just leave this to the individual states to handle. This would then become Captain Amrinder's problem or not, depending on your point of view. But the government
correct. And over the decades, state governments have confronted these kinds of resistances when they have also brought reforms. Reform has never been peaceful in these sectors. They are contested, but it's done at the states. We need central, facilitation, frameworks, interstate coordination. But
too much top-downness is creating other problems. Casey Singh, since you introduced yourself by, said, you're the grandson of a farmer, I think Mekhala makes the point that no one's a farmer alone, especially in relatively prosperous states like Punjab, right? These are not small landholders that we're talking about. And I remember at one of the protests, I asked one of the farmers that, people say you're prosperous, and they said, so do you want us to be poor? And there was no defensiveness about the fact that there had been a hard-earned income, a relative prosperity, the state that gave India its green revolution. And may I remind everybody, when we call these people Khalistanis, the state that sends the largest number of Jawans to the Indian army, so I think we just need to remember data when we besmirch an entire people. Ambassador Casey Singh, go ahead, and I do want you to come in both on what the government should do now, but also the interesting point made about the Western savior complex. I do think we need to spend a little bit of time talking about it. Should the government be concerned about how the Western media and therefore how the world is looking at this story? Casey.
First, very quickly, the second point first. I just Googled, I was looking at the Capitol, writing at the Capitol Hill in Washington. Chancellor Merkel spoke up about it. President Macron spoke about it. Swedish Prime Minister spoke about it. Home Secretary of England, of UK, very strongly said that we are very shocked at what's happening there. The entire European Union spoke about it. They said this is not the democracy that we were expecting, the leading democracy of the world. So they should have turned around and said, it's none of your business. Why are you talking about it? So this will happen. The world is more interrelated, interconnected. So I don't see why we get so, agitated so fast about it. Now, coming to agriculture, this is precisely the kind of argument that Jaggi's made, etc., is the one that gets the backs of the farmers up. It's an economic problem, small stake in the GDP. So now we don't need them because other states can grow wheat. Now, what kind of an argument is this? You see, these were the states that made you self-sufficient in food. Okay, there's an agrarian crisis. Okay, we need to make a transition. But is this the way to make a transition? That you bulldoze a bill through the parliament, you don't allow a division in Rajya Sabha, you don't refer the law to the committees of the parliament, you don't allow a proper debate on them, and with a COVID-affected environment, you ram it through. And then you say, why are people objecting? The reason there are parliamentary procedures is precisely to allow this kind of debate and discussion in the portals of the parliament. Now, if you don't allow it there and you make parliament completely irrelevant as far as proper debate and discussion is concerned, then it goes to the street, which is what has happened. So now you are negotiating with a farmer at the street level. Now, therefore, whose fault is it? The ones who have brought the law in or the ones who are affected by the law? Now, it's essentially agriculture as a state subject. By a sleight of hand, they brought it in saying marketing is with the union government. Now, that itself, Supreme Court has not opined on it. That have you gone in a federal structure into what is a state subject And I know what senior people, if you talk to the Punjab government at the highest level, they're saying, why didn't you leave it to the states? And that's what Subramanian Swamy said yesterday, that a number of BJP leaders are saying, you pass the law, by all means pass it, but don't ram it down everybody's throat. It's a large country. What applies to farmers in one part of the country doesn't apply to farmers in other parts of the country.
Can I ask you something? We can talk about where the government could go from here in terms of options, Casey. But very quickly, on your first point, when you quoted sort of Chancellor Merkel and Macron and all of these people commenting on what happened at the Capitol Hill, it's not quite the same thing, let's say, as Shah Rukh Khan suddenly deciding to write about it, right? The equivalent would be or Amir Khan suddenly deciding to write about it. So I think that there is a kind of, as Hannah said, there's a kind of sort of feeling here that this is a surface level intervention, not a state to state intervention. Though of course it might have been much worse if Biden-Harris had actually made a statement. I mean, I think that would have caused.
I'm sure if Shah Rukh Khan had talked about what happened on Capitol Hill, US will just ignore it. If they could ignore what their allies are saying, and the top leaders of Europe are saying, they certainly won't be bothered about what Shah Rukh Khan is saying. That's the point. But why do you get so agitated about it? I still remember Venkateshwaran, who was sacked by Rajiv Gandhi, complaining to Venkateshwaran, the foreign secretary, that an image is not good abroad. So he turned around and told the Prime Minister, there's a law of physics. The image relates to reality, which was, of course, not liked by the Prime Minister. Now, if you put those kinds of barricades, Delhi police, I spent 2 years in IPS before I joined Foreign Service. So I know a bit about it. Now, Delhi police obviously screwed up. They were not able to handle it properly. Now they've gone overboard. So from a state of not being able to stop the mob, not being able to anticipate that one part of them, which had declared the night before that they were going to break the given route, the Delhi police commissioner has conceded it, that we knew that there's one part of the crowd which was going to break. Why couldn't they then stop them? Or they didn't want to stop them? Or what is the reason for that? Now, therefore, now they've gone overboard. This is typical of any security agency. Same thing happened when the swearing-in took place. No, one second, Barkha, 1 second. No, 1 second. When the swearing-in took place in Washington, did you see the deployment in Washington? Because there also the security agency went overboard because they were overrun once. So same thing happened. Did you see the fencing around Washington? I mean, it was unimaginable.
But I just want to say one thing. I just want to say one thing, that when you talk about the police mishandling it, please let's all be realistic that the decision to let in that tractor rally all the way to Red Fort on a day like Republic Day would not have been the police commissioner's decision. It would have been a political decision. And similarly, I think the decision to put up these barricades all around these protest sites is also going to be political. Now, we are talking about why is the world interfering. Before I come to Hannah and go around the panel, the former police commissioner of Delhi, Amod Kant, on this program, on this platform, referenced Tiananmen Square when he said he found, this is the police officer talking, when he said he found these images of barricades going up horrifying. Let's just play that out and then I want to come to Hannah. If you were serving as police commissioner today, sir, what would you be telling the Home Minister?
Well, I think if I'm forthright and if I'm allowed to speak, I'll say that definitely the government has to find some way out. And the situation, probably the government also might let it go to a particular point. But then we don't want to create Tiananmen Square in Delhi or whatever. I mean, the situation, if it becomes so volatile and the situation, I mean, the assembly is such that the police cannot really deal with that.
So, he's basically saying the police's hands are tied. Hannah, when you as a foreign correspondent see the kind of barricading, it isn't just Rihanna, right? When you see the kind of dramatic visuals of iron rods and spikes and nails, you see sedition cases against journalists, albeit journalists who got the story wrong. When you see the police now being deployed with this new kind of weaponry, when you see, and I have to be fair to the police here, there was that very dramatic Reuters photograph, if we can shift to that in a moment from now, actually showing a police officer being stabbed. When all of this happens, how can the world media not take notice? It isn't just about Rihanna, is it?
No, I mean, like I said, Rihanna, she wouldn't even have been like a line in my story had the Indian government not responded. The big issue here is the kind of very horrifying, very kind of draconian visuals that we're seeing, which don't necessarily speak to a kind of response of a democratic government to a peaceful protest. The narrative around the farmers is that, these are hundreds of thousands of farmers who are, having their voice heard, that they've been camped out peacefully. And, whilst what happened in Republic Day was obviously, was a kind of shifted the narrative a little bit, it was also not necessarily representative of the whole movement. And the kind of, the way in which these camps are now being kind of made into, these are sort of images, war zone type images, with barriers and trenches and spikes. These are not the kind of natural response to a peaceful movement, civilian movement. And again, they kind of speak to this sort of, I guess, overzealous response to, a civilian protest, which is, a huge international story, from where I'm standing at least, and from where my editor is standing.
Yeah. Anuraag, does that convince you a little bit about, the trope that you used about the Western savior complex not quite applying here? You provide these visuals to the world, you expect the world not to react to them?
Well, you see, everybody has a right to react to really whatever the heck they want to. The point is not whether the world has a right to react or not, right? The 2 points I'd like to make here are, A, the phraseology of it that is being used outside India perhaps need to be corrected. With due respect, Hannah, you've been calling them farmers in your articles. Why not just call, the subsection that actually tried to pull the flag down? Why would you not just refer to them as terrorists or rioters, exactly as what happened on the Capitol Hill? 2, I think we need to move the conversation from narratives and opinions and, fanboys and fangirls of Rihanna and the US and whatever. Let's not forget, an average Indian has 1/30th the GDP of an average American. We cannot have the police structure or the legal structure like they do in the US. We have to move the conversation from opinions and narratives to data, to truth. Nihar Shashital has done some amazing work in busting the myth that farmer suicides are as high as they are in India. On an average, there's 4% farmers that commit suicide, compared to 10% of non-farmer poor.
But Anuraag, whether or not Hannah uses, and this was a debate the American media had as well, would you call them rioters, do you call them protesters? And nomenclature is something we all struggle with, every day. Should we say love jihad or should we say love jihad, right? This carries on in all of our lives. Every day is a new learning on what language to use. My question quite simply is, these barricades are guaranteed to make an international story. You have to be cognizant, when we say something is deeply political, the imagery you construct around it look at that crane. I saw that crane today at the Singhu border, right? And then juxtaposed with it, Bhagat Singh images everywhere. Kaveree, if you want to come in quickly there, and then I actually want to go to Govind. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Anuraag, go ahead. Sorry,
just give me 30 seconds. Barkha, I absolutely get your question. The point I'm making is there can be 2 polar opposite views of the nails on the roads and the cranes. On one end, I understand it can be seen as an overbearing police state. On the other end, there could be people who could view it as as a government that's trying to protect its people, its capital, its sovereignty for that matter. Neither camps or neither views need to be condescending about the other, and I think that's we shouldn't really care where the conversation.
Binaries are bloody irritating, but they reflect the polarized country that we have become today. And Kaveree, you wanted to come in there and then Govind.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about the fanboys and fangirls of Rihanna. I think the most starstruck people possibly is the government of India. They are possibly the biggest fanboys of Kangana Ranaut. There was Arun Shourie who once said that this is UPA plus cow. I think this is UPA plus Kangana, because she possibly is their biggest supporter, possibly also the unofficial head of their troll army, and is called out whenever there's a crisis, whatever the crisis is, whether it's calling out Diljit Dosanjh, or whether it's calling out the farmers, or whatever it is. She either has to make a film on it, or she has to talk about the Sanghi woman versus the Libru woman, whatever that means. So I think when you talk about fangirls and fanboys, perhaps you should be a little careful about where exactly your fanboys are.
Okay, Anuraag, one sentence, literally. I have to go to Govind to discuss where we go from here. Yes. And I do not want to discuss Kangana Ranaut. Yeah,
you started with
Kaveree. I really think that UPA plus Kangana is what we should remember.
Okay. Anurag, quickly, move it along now. Come on.
Look,
I have to go to
okay,
Govind. Yeah.
you started with Madeleine Albright's statement about women pulling down others,
Yeah.
and that's precisely what you've been doing with Kangana.
No, not at all. I'm possibly her greatest fan. I'm every woman's fan.
Can we stay on focus?
We heard you, Kaveree. We heard you. The point I'm trying to make is this conversation is not about Kangana. This conversation is not about your personal labeling or disrespect of Kangana or Diljit or anybody else.
What it is about is that everything, that there's so much noise around this conversation that you can't have this conversation anymore, and that is where we are stuck. Now, before I come to you, Govind, I want to play out. I was at the single border this morning. What is emerging very clearly is that the farmers are now looking at the Prime Minister. The farmers are not interested in what the Agriculture Minister has to say. The farmers are not interested in what Piyush Goyal has to say. The farmers believe, so he's been their target. So there's sometimes very less than parliamentary language that is used for the Prime Minister at these protests. Obviously, we do not endorse that. We do not give it airtime. But many farmers are saying, why can't the Prime Minister come and meet us? And I remember Ashok Gulati, in an interview to me saying, and he's heading the Supreme Court panel, he's pro the farm laws, let the Prime Minister go have a jalebi with the farmers. So I asked the farmers today, what would happen if the Prime Minister just wanted to meet you? And this is what they said. अगर प्रधानमंत्री या सरकार की तरफ से कोई आपके साथ यहाँ आके खाना खाने के लिए बैठेगा, उनको रोटी अच्छी तरह से खिलाएंगे कि नहीं? नहीं। मेरा कहने का मतलब है कि सरकार अगर आपसे बातचीत करने के लिए तैयार हो, आप लोग राजी हैं?
महाराज की बात करेगा राजी, हाँ।
राजी हो?
हाँ, महाराज की बात करेगा राजी, हाँ। नियम में कोई राजी नहीं।
मतलब कानून वापस होना चाहिए।
हमें तो पुन दाखिल खिला देंगे उनकी रोटी। तो मैं बताऊँ बात, हमें उसके मुताबिक गला नहीं चलते, उसके रोटी खिला देंगे हमें पुन दाखिल, और वो रोटी नहीं खिला सकते हमें।
Okay, so for the women, and then there were men also, and I asked those men, what would you do if the Prime Minister came by? And they said, why only chai? We'd give the Prime Minister laddus as well, but please, why doesn't he talk to us? Now, there is an urge to be acknowledged and recognized by the leader of the country, Govind. And that's what I'm really picking up. They are not interested in Mr. Tomar. I think before these protests happened, if we were asked to name, this is no personal disrespect to him, but if we were asked to name the Agriculture Minister, most of us would actually struggle. Where do we go from here? The Parliament is in session. Can the Prime Minister make an intervention?
So yeah, it's interesting that the bite that you showed was of a lady farmer. One of the worst stereotypes we have of farmers is male, whereas more than 30% are actually female, and that number has been rising. So which points to other gender issues in the agricultural economy structure, but that's not what we're talking about. Punjab has a population roughly, I think, about 30 million. Roughly 5 million, as I could gauge, is involved in agriculture. When I say 5 million, not all 5 million are working, but these are families included. So it's really 5 million people in Punjab, assuming this problem is largely Punjab, who perhaps have a problem with these farm laws, and obviously their voices are amplified because of their ability to, present themselves physically and otherwise. So I think the problem is something that has to be addressed in scale. This is, as everyone knows and has argued, is not an all India problem. It's a localized problem, but that does not make it a non-problem. It is an issue that has to be addressed. It is an issue that now has to be addressed because of the manner in which it has escalated by people who are keen to find a solution. The Prime Minister, if you go back to his Gujarat Chief Minister days, was a pretty good problem solver. I actually, oftentimes when I look at the responses that he has today and I compare them to what he did as Gujarat Chief Minister in the economic sphere, I find that he's not as practical as he used to be earlier. So for whatever reasons. And I think if indeed he's the one who can break the ice, then he should, because I think the solutions are pretty simple. I don't think, to my mind at least, it's about whether the farm laws, those 3 laws, are flawed completely, or they should be thrown out like a baby with the bathwater. No, I think those laws are required. They definitely need some improvement in areas, including on whether they have the right to go to courts and things like that. But I think those laws are good. I think private sector intervention is very critical, particularly for where we are as an economy, and therefore we need to break the ice and move on, because this is creating larger problems, including the reason we're talking about it today. And please remember, I'm sitting in Mumbai, so this is not it's not as real to me as someone sitting in Delhi. So we need to move on. We need to break the ice. We need to connect with the farmers, and which is more emotionally, because I don't think it's a matter of logic as much as it is maybe emotion and ego. and connect with them and put this thing behind and move on. I mean, we've just come out of COVID. I mean, we've had a massive economic shock. We've got a lot of other problems to solve. We had a $5 trillion economy target. It's not going to be easy now. We're only going to come back to maybe levels of a year ago after a year. So we've got a lot of work to do. So let's get back to work.
Okay, let me take this now for last comments, and let's try and reconnect with Ambassador K.C. Singh. I don't know where we last time. Mekhala, I'll start with you.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I mean, just taking off from this last point, I want to make just 3 quick points. The question of image, in India's image. I think it's really important to consider who are we holding accountable for India's image. I mean, we've just seen the NFHS data on malnutrition. Are you going to hold those hungry and malnourished responsible? So if people are distressed, if they're experiencing economic distress and expressing it, I think it's important to understand that you cannot hold them responsible for the expression of that distress and say that that is sullying India's image. It is difficult. We are going through a difficult transition. We have many great economic challenges. I think it's interesting that when it comes to COVID, the same points that have been made about how we are a poor country, but we have shown remarkable response has been held up. So to then say that, we're not as rich and not as wealthy as other countries and therefore cannot be expected to respond like that is strange. So we cannot be selective about this. We have to be honest about where we have capacity, where we are doing well, where we have challenges and deep challenges ahead, and be honest about that. I think, just linked to this question is process. Whether you can hold Rihanna or any celebrity responsible for how much research they do before they tweet, we can certainly hold our government to a process. And there are processes for passing laws. There are systems, particularly in a federal, country where we have center and state, and where there is a very deep involvement of the state in agriculture. There is a process, and I think we are seeing the result of if we had a stronger pre-legislative process. These laws have been presented as horizon laws. I mean, we've just talked about the fact that they're going to need years of investment. You don't bring laws that change the shape of a sector as ordinances. Ordinances are for emergency laws, right?
Yeah.
If this is a long horizon, if this is something that's going to need many years of investment and shaping and support, we need to do that. And then the last point I want to make is that, we've talked about the shrinking role of agriculture in the Indian economy. And last year we had a panel where we said, what would happen if we actually really believed in Indian agriculture? And I don't think we have a future for development, growth, economic growth, if we don't place agriculture at the center of those transformations. It is one of the most powerful multipliers.
Okay, Govind, very briefly, as your last comment, you said that the Prime Minister, when he was Chief Minister, made more effective economic interventions. What could that intervention look like today?
I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, you talked about the jalebi diplomacy. I mean, maybe it's just the jalebi diplomacy. But, just to come back to the previous point on farmers, 86% of farmers in India are small and marginal, right? So they cannot survive in this form. We have to understand, either we have to take them. The only way farmers can become better is if they do not get out of farming, or if they are not in farming. So if you have to get them out, either you have an urban growth industrialization strategy that makes up for it, or we bring businesses into agriculture in a way that they become scale, they become, so we have to find that kind of a solution. So, I mean, that's on the agriculture side. But I think on the other side, whether it's a jalebi or a rasgulla, I mean, take your pick. But I think that's what you need, and we need to get going. I mean, that's my point.
Yeah, we do need to get going. Anuraag, very quickly, then Hannah, Kaveree, and Jaggi can have the last word. Anuraag, very quickly. Sorry, let me unmute you.
Just unmuted myself. Look, Barkha, India started off as a non-aligned country. We were always a cat on the wall, didn't want to side with Russia, didn't want to side with America. Over the years, we've lost, the whole Gandhian pacifism, and now we are taking sides. We are emerging or re-emerging as a civilization and things like that. We've seen multiple places, including the TikTok ban and what have you, where the current government has taken a stand of sovereignty over internationalism. What the statement that the MEA issued today was in as part of that same agenda. Now, coming to the farmers' protests, I don't know what the solution is. Some great ideas here on this program, but I think the larger narrative globally is that, hey, listen, we're a sovereign nation. We will solve ourselves internally. We don't need doesn't matter. You could be the greatest singer, you could be the greatest porn star.
I
you
know,
could
but
be
if
the
they just
greatest
if they'd just been quiet, that may have made that point more effectively. Is the only point, right?
I absolutely agree.
Unfortunately, you don't actually have to explain yourselves to people over and over again. Yeah,
you're
sorry,
right. I mean,
yeah, just that. Sorry, I'm going to just interrupt you there because we're literally at the end of the hour, so I'm already over time. Hannah, Kaveree, and then Jaggi gets the last word. Hannah, go ahead. How are you looking at this story from where you're perched now?
Well, I mean, it will just be very interesting. And from my point of view, it's just this increasing tension that's rising between the farmers and the authorities and the government, and kind of where this kind of is going to be placed. It feels like there is kind of, so much kind of misplaced anger here. And like you say, I think the sort of refusal by the Prime Minister to meet the farmers and to kind of bring, put the kind of himself in front of them, I think is a really sort of interesting absence that is something that, kind of will keep the story developing. But yeah, I feel like there is just a lot of kind of, the sort of the increased presence of troops and wire and paramilitary forces at the site of a peaceful protest is of kind of enduring interest. And where that goes, I have no idea.
Kaveree?
Yeah, I just think that this government has always had a blind spot about dissent. It doesn't quite know how to handle dissent, whether it's the students at JNU or whether it's the women of Shaheen Bagh. It doesn't know exactly how to reach out to people. And is it because it doesn't have a crisis manager or a troubleshooter, say like the UPA had, whether they were successful with it or not? But they always had, say, like a Pranab Mukherjee to reach out to people. At least they tried to. So is that a problem here? That therefore the person who the dissenters can most easily point out to is the Prime Minister himself. Perhaps there should be someone in this government who can actually reach out to people when they, because you cannot have just an electoral democracy. We're a functioning democracy. There will be elements who are not happy with you all the time, even the people who voted for you. So should you not have somebody to do that outreach for you permanently or change it according to the situation? That's the limited point I want to make here.
Okay, I think that's a very interesting point, and I'll take that to Jaggi. You see, what happens is, we all know the Prime Minister is bigger than the party. In many ways, Modi is the message. But what happens with that kind of centralization of not just power, but also perception, is that every time there is a crisis, the people at the other end of the conversation with the government are looking at the Prime Minister, because the government is built around the Prime Minister. And so anything less than the Prime Minister begins to feel like the real guy isn't talking to us. And that's really, in a sense, what we're hearing from the farmers again and again, Jaggi. So it is the paradox or the flip side of being almost like a presidential government. What would you have the Prime Minister therefore do at this point? He could make use of the fact that Parliament is in session. He could stand up and say something. He could stand up like he's gone to the Jawans and just say, I'm coming to Singhu border. And that would actually take the wind out of the sails, both of the farmers and the political opposition. I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that the only man who can scale ego walls on both sides is the Prime Minister, because he has so far stood above the battle, though he has backed the farm laws. So I think going and meeting some of the farmers in a very well choreographed thing, it would be a good thing. I have one additional point to make. A lot of people talk about discussion, this, that, and all that. Actually, that has not worked in India, because we seldom find consensus on anything except terrible laws. Okay, the only time when we have had path-breaking reforms is when there was no consultation, like in 1991. What did we do? We just rammed through because they said we are bankrupt, we have to do this, we will do it. That did Manmohan Singh call all the opposition parties and tell them that, look, let's discuss this for the next 6 months and figure it out? Or let's say, for example, even the land bill or the food security, was it ever done? Or this bifurcation of Andhra?
The government had to take the land acquisition ordinance back. Let's remind everyone of that.
No, only the stoppage you needed a consensus. But for putting a bad law through, there is a wide consensus. Food security, wide consensus. Breaking of Andhra, no consensus, but you ram it through this parliament in one very contentious session. So my point is, we are a very difficult country to rule. And when you want to move forward, I quote George Bernard Shaw or whoever it was, that it's the unreasonable man who gets to move things along.
Well, I will just say maybe long be difficult because I think that
Yeah.
there is no such thing as too much democracy, and I think that the fact that we can all sort of disagree in the ferocious manner that we can, to me, is a dipstick test of democracy. And yes, the trolls do get asinine sometimes, and the polarization is mind-numbing. But maybe continue to be difficult. I think that is the only way to deepen our democracy, as much of a nightmare as it is for anyone who has to govern this very diverse, argumentative country. Leaving it there, Hannah, Mekhala, Govind, Anurag, Kaveree, and Jaggi, and thanks, Casey. I don't know where we lost you. Thank you very much. Thank you to our audience. This is a story we continue to report on the ground. We'll have special in-depth reports from the Singh border coming up in the next few hours on the Mojo Story. So do tune in, thanking our panel and thanking our audience. See you tomorrow, same time, same place. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.